Hello, friends. So today uh, I'm going to talk about a vindication of the rights of women, and this is one of the texts which is known to be very, prominent writing in feminist writing, and especially this is there in the syllabus of Delhi University MA English. So we are going to talk about that. I will be reading certain significant writings, and you have to listen me. This is quite factual, and whatever points if you feel like writing down, you could do that. So let's come. Okay. Published in 1792. Please remember, note this date, year. Published in 1792, A Vindication of the Rights of Women was a path-breaking work coming at the time when nobody even talked of women's rights, let alone demand them in such a compelling and forceful manner. Women at that time were at best considered to be created solely for the pleasure of man and only decorative or ornamental in importance. So women's presence is being considered to be uh, created solely for the pleasure of man. I mean, it's a kind of object or a kind of instrument which, or anything which, a man can have pleasure. Wollstonecraft spent only 6 weeks in actual composition of this work, but she has been developing the ideas of a vindication of all her life. She found that most writers showed either outright disdain or condescending praise of women's weakness. Being weak physically made a direct case of intellectual inferiority too. So it is men's assumption or thinking that women are physically weak, although they are not. And how this physically weak means intellectually weak. So the mind is being associated with the body. Being weak physically made a direct case of intellectual inferiority too. In fact, women were considered inferior being and probably just a shade above the level of brute in animal kingdom that lived purely physical lives without any rational abilities. Wollstonecraft's work came as an emphatic assertion of the rights of women, and at the same time, it was a frontal attack on the wrongs that have been inflicted on women in the name of protection. In her work, Wollstonecraft argues ingeniously to highlight how uh, society had worked towards constructing the female species to suit its requirement. All the voices and frailties of the female sex were as a result of that construction, which advised women to acquire these frailties, women in the guise of protection. She highlighted that the very protection that society offered to women was the cause of confining them to the vices and virtues of an inferior class, and thus perverted them from establishing a common humanity with men. In this context, she was most vociferous in her attack on the discriminatory education system and held it largely responsible for making women frivolous and incapable. In the fact, the immediate cause of vindication was Talleyrand's report on public institution and outline of the projected plan of the national education under a new French constitution. Talleyrand declared that girls should be educated with boys only until the age of 8. Wollstonecraft prefaced her book with a letter to Talleyrand which argues him and his compatriots not to deny women in their rights. She posits that an education system that allowed girls the same advantage as boys would result in women who would not be only exceptional wives and mothers but also capable of working in many professions. So women are being considered to, girls are being considered to prepare in the best way of how they could be a best wife and best mother. It was not as though the other people had not written on this issue before. Among Wollstonecraft's contemporaries, there were several in France who had written on behalf of women. Olympie de uh, Gauss spoke boldly in defense of her sex in several publications, and one was titled A Declaration of the Rights of Women. Condorcet endorsed and advocated before education for women in Memoir on Public Instruction. Wollstonecraft had views Catherine Macaulay's letter on the education for the analytical and acknowledged her debt to the work in vindication. Macaulay's letter on education denies any fundamental differences in the character between the sexes, attributing women's weakness to faulty education and social position. Wollstonecraft repeats and develops almost every point of her work. What is unique of a Wollstonecraft's work is her suggestion that the betterment of women's status be affected through the such political changes as the radical reform of national education system. Such a change, she concluded, was benefit all society. In vindication, we also find vindication we also find the first a feminist critique of the male generated image of women in literature. Literature is an important and effective means of social conditioning, of generating and strengthening opinion and stereotypes. It is also an effective means of conveying to us how society accepts us to behave. In this way, a reading literature become one of the most basic means of our education. At times, there are conduct books such as Dr. Gregory's A Father's Legacy to his daughter, which openly spell out the kind of conduct expected from women. Less obvious but possibly more powerful is the influence experts by work that are considered to be great literature. Milton's Paradise Lost fits into the latter category. Wollstonecraft exposes writers like Milton, Rousseau, Pope, Chesterfield, Bacon, and others for their prejudice projection of women and highlights how the prevailing opinion are framed and strengthened by image of women in work of these writers. Wollstonecraft deliberately uses the word women in her title instead of women. So the difference is word WOMAN and this is other is instead of WOMEN. By doing so, she's questioning whether there are characteristics that are essential to women and a womankind. The family body as opposed to humankind. In addition, that she's arguing that if the attributes of the woman during her time are not essential, a woman, sorry, I'm speaking two words. One is a woman and another is women, WOMEN. So Mary Wollstonecraft is using the word WOMAN, woman. It's not women. These attributes are not fixed and immutable. They can be scrutinized, challenged, and changed. Wollstonecraft, now let's understand the life and works of Wollstonecraft. Mary Wollstonecraft was propelled towards her radical views and her revolutionary arguments by her own personal circumstances and experiences. Born in 1759, she was the second of the six children of Edward John Wollstonecraft and Elizabeth Dixon. Throughout her childhood and adolescent years, Wollstonecraft helplessly witnessed the mute submissiveness of her mother in face of brutal tyranny of her despotic father, having lost his inherited fortune in a number of unsuccessful attempts at farming. Edward John often resort to abusing his wife physically under the influence of drink. As his farming venture failed, one after another, the family was made to move to six different locations throughout Britain. Ultimately, he even used up the money settled on his daughters and landed the family in debt. In 1782, Elizabeth Dixon died, leaving Mary Wollstonecraft in charge of her siblings. At the age of 19, she moved away from home, not only to escape the suffocating and intolerable rule of her despotic father, but more to help him come out of his financial difficulties. At first, she earned her living as a companion to the companion to a widow in Bath, and later she opened the school in Newington Green along with her sister Elizabeth and close friend, governess in the family, and close friend Fanny Blood. The school did not do very well, and Wollstonecraft then moved on to work as a governess in the family of the Lord Kingsborough and lived most of the time in Ireland. In 1787, when her services were no longer required, she settled in in George Street, London, and decided to take up literature as a career. Throughout this period, Wollstonecraft pursued her own education, teaching herself both French and German, despite the constraining circumstances at home. Her identification with women's suffering had begun only in life when she had helplessly watched her mother's suffering. In the case of her young sister Eliza, however, she took a bold and radical step when she reduced her from an equally despotic husband. Later, she responded to a call for help from her friend Fanny and tried with her all might to assist her through a difficult pregnancy. Wollstonecraft was devastated when both mother and child succumbed to the complications and lack of proper medical aid. Her resolve to campaign for women's rights was thus strengthened by her personal experience when she saw women suffering at the hands of insensitive and rigid patriarchal setup. Wollstonecraft's experience at Newington Green had given her an opportunity to interact intellectually with Richard Price, one of the famous radical thinkers of the time. Her thoughts on the education of daughter, 1787, was a result of that experience. The following year, she met Joseph Johnson and began writing for the alternative Atlantic Review. Her first novel, Mary, colon, a fiction, original stories, and the female reader followed in 1788 1789. In 1790, she responded to the Edmund Brooke's reflection on the revolution in France by writing A Vindication of the Rights of Man, which was an instant success. Wollstonecraft had by now come to be recognized as one of the leading intellectuals of the time. Vindication of the Rights of Man. Okay, she has written Vindication of the Rights of Man. Working with Joseph Johnson, and she had come to contact with benefited from the cerebral stimulation of men like William Blake, Henry Fuseli, Tom Paine, and Dr. George Fordyce. In 1792, Wollstonecraft of the Rights of Women was published, which came as a sequel to her Rights of Man, but was groundbreaking in its advocacy for the inclusion of the women in all progress of social reform. With the publication of the Women's Vindication, Wollstonecraft formally concerned herself in the rank and file of the leading thinkers of the time. Wollstonecraft left the Paris in 1792 to collect material of her major work, a historical and moral view of the origins and progress of the French Revolution and the effect it had produced in Europe. It was in 1793 in Paris that she met Gilbert Imlay, an American businessman, and had a close relationship with him. In May 1794, she bore him a daughter, Fanny, but still did not formalize a relationship. Imlay's desertion later devastated her and she tried to commit suicide twice. Eventually, resurging from the emotional crisis of Wollstonecraft, resumed her literary activities and was drawn towards William Godwin, whom she had met earlier in this literary circle at Joseph Johnson's home, but had not been much impressed with him. Now, however, the two became very close, and even though ideologically they were both against the institution of marriage, yet they decided to formalize their relationship once Mary became pregnant. On August 30, 1797, a daughter Mary was born to them. 10 days later, Wollstonecraft died due to complications arising from childbirth. So now we are online and you are listening Mary Wollstonecraft and A Vindication of Women. It's a very significant text, and I think for every student who is a student of literature, and even in not as a student, This is something very significant which you need to know. All of us need to know. So Wollstonecraft, even though Wollstonecraft advocated an unemotional and rational approach to the life of women, her own life was fraught with emotional upheavals once after another, which at times she found difficult to deal with. A discrepancy therefore occurred in what she advocated in her writing and what she exemplified in her own life. Immediately after this publication, Rights of Women had been an instant success, and many notable women had openly declared their following. After Wollstonecraft's death, however, when William Godwin published her memoir and the posthumous work of Mary Wollstonecraft, the reading public saw for the first time not only her unfinished novel Maria or the Wrongs of Women, but also of all her personal correspondence with Gilbert Im- Imlay, which were romantic, passionate, and overtly sexual. Godwin's memoir exposed Wollstonecraft's affair with Henry Fuseli and Gilbert Imlay, and the fact that she had a daughter out of wedlock, had attempted suicide, and also exposed her intimate relationship with Godwin before the two had to get married. All of this exposed Wollstonecraft to be under an infatuated spell, doing just the things she had advocated against. Godwin's completely misjudged his audience and did more harm than good to Wollstonecraft's reputation, though his well intentioned attempted. One reader labeled her as a hyena in petticoat. A respectable woman found it hard to openly support Wollstonecraft's cause of female emancipation. This is one of the phrase which I heard, many times. Hyena in petticoat. Respectable women found it hard to openly support Wollstonecraft's cause of female emancipation. Rights of women went into oblivion for almost a century. Interest in was review, and the feminist movements finally took off. Wollstonecraft's view of on education, her demands for equal opportunities for political and legal rights of women, was seen to be very effective, voicing the major concern of the feminist movement well before its formal launch. Henceforth, rights of women require the status of basic points of reference for any study on feminist issues. So, what are the prevailing, what are the prevailing opinions of the sexual character discussed? Women as a social constructed being, argues Wollstonecraft in her treatise, A Vindication of the Rights of Women. In the chapter under a consideration, prevailing opinions of the sexual character discussed, she skillfully managed to highlight just as a social condition of the women keeps them in a status of ignorance and selfish dependence, and encourages them to be docile and attentive to their looks at the exclusion of everything else. Concern of romantic love and physical desirability, which society described as natural condition of female existence, is nothing but socially imposed means to enslave them under male domination. So, in this article, what I realized, what I am able to understand it, first of all, women are being seen as the object of pleasure for men. So it's a kind of object, the way you use computer or a dining table or a motorbike or anything which could be helpful for you, or in a way mobile. So any object which help you to do your work, that is how the women are being taken as an object. Second, the conditioning of the women, the girls are being done in such a way where they are being focused on their body. How do you look, how do you appear yourself, how men's are looking at you. So uh, apart from this, there is intellectual growth, they can be skillful, they can be very expertise of any profession, or they could be equally competent in every sphere. For example, they could be mechanic, they could be uh, very good professional where they are earning a lot. So instead of focusing on earning money, acquiring skills, or becoming independent, the girls are being trained to focus on their look. Okay, how do they look? Your face, your color, your complexion, your hair, your height, So uh, these are the these are the uh, target areas which are being given to the girls, and when they are uh, preparing themselves for such thing, obviously they lack skill, they lack income. Okay, so they lack skill, they lack income, and when you are not earning anything, I'm sorry, you will never be. I mean, the because the person who is using you, the person who is interested in you, might have another object. Okay, so you are one of the object. So either you become, irreplaceable, or either you will be replaced. So that's how she's actually trying to say that we have to work on our skills rather than how do I look, how do whether I am using lipstick or not, and what is my skin color, and how men pursue me. So these are the things which are not for women. The way, men's, they focus on earning skill, acquiring knowledge, and uh, earning more. I think in the same way, and as Judith Butler also says, before we are women, we are humans actually, right? So before you identify yourself as a woman, you identify yourself as a human. If you identify yourself as a human, then everything else is okay, right? So Wollstonecraft exposes most of these prevailing opinions to be prejudiced and therefore unfair. Dealing with these prevailing opinions one by one, Wollstonecraft argues convincingly that the root of the problem lies in either a complete lack of education or women or working kind of education for them, which in turn gets determined by the widespread discrimination against them. Wollstonecraft takes examples from well-known writers and their work which go a long way in forming public opinion. Inconsistencies in their ideas. Having highlighted how the society prejudice worked to enslave women, Wollstonecraft proceeded to show how the right kind of education hold the key to providing them with a correct perspective on things. It is education which can help women to achieve a sense of self-respect and give them an opportunity to break free of the stereotypes to forgive a new self-image. So, it's not a kind of general opinion I'm making, but man think of woman that as if she's somebody who could help him, she's somebody who could take care of him, and she's somebody on, out of her labor and work, help, he could elevate himself. So man is always thinking that this woman could help me, and that is how the women should think about themselves. So that's how in this article itself, Mary Wollstonecraft is saying that man is working for himself and woman is working for man. you know Man is working for himself and a woman is working for him. So that is how we have to see this. Wollstonecraft begin her argument in this chapter by asking a part-time but relevant questions. Why, she asked, do the two sexes have to aim at different character even in the argument of virtue? In other words, society has given a sex even to virtue, so that what is virtue for man is not virtue for women, and vice versa. Nature has made women physically weaker than men, but Wollstonecraft point out how men have ingeniously used this aspect of women's physical makeup to render her intellectually weaker, too, so she is thought immediately incapable and aspiring from the acquiring what really deserve the name of virtue. But this lead Wollstonecraft to ask another question. If women have souls, then there can be only one path to virtue, and that is the path laid by providence of all begin at the possess said soul. If we deny women the access that path, that in other words, were implying that women do not have a soul, which of course is not correct. Women should in fact first aim at obtaining a character as a human being, regardless of distinctive So that's how Judith Butler also support this idea very clearly. What does she say? Judith says, before you identify yourself as a woman, you have to understand yourself as a human being first. You know, that sexual identity, genital identity is later, but your human identity is primary. That is more significant. Okay, having established that women do have souls, the next logic step to Wollstonecraft arguing to examine the prevailing practice of keeping them ignorance in the name of innocence. If women do not consequential being like the flying insects, then why their intellect should be kept undeveloped in the name of innocence. She argues that men's complaints regarding the follies and caprices of the fair sex are not unjustified. But the path breaking argument put forth by Wollstonecraft is that this inferior conduct and a dependency or denying them opportunities to build their strength of mind. To substantiate her argument, Wollstonecraft exposes how right from their childhood women are taught that all they need to go along in life is a little cunning, softness of temper, and outward obedience and adherence to an outward show of propriety. The This is sufficient to get them the protection of the man, and if any chance they possess physical beauty, then nothing else alone. Then it is a small wonder that women turn out to be creatures of docile and cunning, whose only aim in life is to win protection of the man. You can notice how women Wollstonecraft are highlighting not just the prevailing opinion of the women, but ingeniously exposing how society contribute towards giving such shape to the opinion. Okay, so how Milton is looking at this whole writing. Throughout the work, Wollstonecraft has illustrated and critiqued the misogynist image of the woman in literature. Literature, being an important means of social condition, often generate opinions and stereotypes and spell out society's expectation from us. In this chapter, we now encounter Wollstonecraft's critique of Milton's creation of stereotype of women in the figure of Eve. Work of such great writers go a long way in forming the influencing public opinion, and Wollstonecraft proceed to expose the prejudiced representation of women in the figure of Eve. So, uh, what Milton is representing women, and that representation we come to know through Eve. Wollstonecraft referred to Paradise Lost, Book 4, line 297 and 99, 297 to 99, which read like this. For contemplation he and velour formed, for softness she and sweet attractive grace. Her for God only, she for God in him. The implications here seems to be that women are inferior beings who have been created only to gratify the sense of man when he can no longer soar on the wings of the contemplation. In doing so, Milton is denying women's soul and projecting them as a gentle domestic brute. It is an insult to be prejudiced, thus, the Wollstonecraft has successfully exposed unfairness being Milton's image of woman. The danger lies in the fact that the work like Paradise Lost go to long way in forming prevalent opinions, and if not uh, work or work advise women to and render themselves soft and attractive, they only strengthen the prejudice already existed in society. So that's how you have to understand what we are trying to read. So this is I was reading Mary Wollstonecraft's Vindication of Women, which is a very significant writer, And in fact, Mary Wollstonecraft was a very popular writer, very famous writer. And I'm trying to read before you so you can understand, you can listen the different opinion. So thank you so much. We'll meet again.